Thanks for tuning in to Telecast. Before this week's show, I wanted to tell you about our exciting new event, the Telecast Content Funding Festival. Taking place at the Ashworth Centre, Lincoln's Inn in London, on Tuesday, April 26th, the Telecast Content Funding Festival has been created to bring producers and financiers together to explore the wide range of production funding options available today. The full-day event features panels with industry leaders exploring the new finance models, sponsored by Pipe, blockchain and NFTs, sponsored by M Content, co-production Evolved, sponsored by Quintus Studios, and brand-funded Programming 2.0, sponsored by Apex Content Ventures. Delegates will be able to schedule face-to-face meetings at the event with our sponsors, who are actively looking to partner with producers. And there's also lots of opportunities to meet with other attending financiers in regular networking breaks throughout the day, sponsored by Drive. Plus, each delegate will receive an exclusive detailed report packed with tips, advice and insight on today's content funding models, courtesy of event partners and industry intelligence experts K7 Media. Tickets are on sale now, starting at just $169.99 for producers and $199.99 for financiers. And for a limited time, Telecast listeners can get an extra £20 off the ticket price by entering Telecast Plus. That's Telecast in capital letters and the plus symbol at checkout. But hurry, tickets are limited and they're available on telecast.com/events. We hope to see you there.
Telecast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to Telecast. We recorded so many great discussions in Cannes last week that they wouldn't all fit into one show. And my guests this week have all got important things to say, so I didn't want to cram them all into last week's show. So on this week's Telecast, I catch up again with Film UA's Kateryna Vyshnevska. She described what's been going on in her life since we spoke a month ago when she was in Kyiv. And I have a rooftop chat with Gregoire Polad, Director General at ACT, the Association of Commercial Television and Video on Demand Services in Europe. He was in town to receive an award for the work his organisation has done in combating disinformation. And apologies in advance for the sound quality in this interview. It was a little blustery, and it's certainly right for trying to enjoy a bit of sunshine on the top of the palais. But please stick with it, as it's a really interesting discussion. Both interviews are coming right up on this week's Telecast. So we talked on last week's show about how great it is to bump into people physically again in Cannes. And I've just bumped into a previous guest on Telecast. I'm sure regular listeners will remember when we spoke to Kateryna Vyshnevska from Film UA when she was in Kyiv. Quite a moving conversation that we had, I think. Kateryna, welcome to Telecast again. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's good to be back, and I am doing better than the last time we spoke, or rather the past weeks of my life. There were a lot of ups and downs, but I can confidently say that today I am feeling better than I have had in quite a while, and it's been a long journey. So from Kyiv through Odessa, then across Moldova, and then Romania. So it was a long journey to my home in London. And it made me also really aware of how lucky and privileged I am to have that, because I followed the journey of thousands and actually millions by now of people along the routes from Ukraine to Europe, with the key difference of me having where to go and they having nowhere to go. And that's the experience that I don't think I will ever be able to forget it, and I don't want to either, because it is important to keep it in your heart. And My family is safe now as well.
Oh, well, that's fantastic news, because when you were on the show, I think it's about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, you were obviously incredibly worried about your mum, weren't you, who's in Mariupol. Tell us about any news you've had on that front.
A lot of news, thank God. And yes, so I am from Mariupol originally, and the big failure of my life, in a way, is the fact that I didn't get my mom out of Mariupol in time, even though that was the plan when I arrived to Kyiv from London. She stayed, and then it was 17 days of continuous, constant bombing of my town of birth, my childhood home, and of me not knowing whether my mom is alive. She is. We managed to get her out and across Berdyansk, which is controlled by the Russians, and Zaporizhia to Lviv. So she's now there, safe and resting, and coming to terms with what happened. And it is the saddest thing I've experienced in my life to actually be talking to her now, because the depth of her pain and the horror of these things she had to live through, it's unimaginable. And
so how did she get out then? Was it one of the Red Cross convoys that we've been hearing about, all sorts of ceasefires allowing Red Cross and other organisations to go in and evacuate people? Was it within one of those evacuations?
Never in Mariupol. Red Cross was actually, they withdrew. So I don't know, there's a lot of publicity out there, and I don't think I'm qualified to talk about that. But from the experience of someone who has family and friends in Mariupol, and luckily almost everyone I know managed to get out safely. Not everyone, some people are still there, but so from the experience of the people I know, Red Cross was actually never there. They tried to deliver some goods in the beginning of the war, but then they basically just withdrew their operation from that part. But the local volunteers, they worked, and this is how my mom got out. And it's a lot of factors, actually, because basically volunteers were trying to get in and evacuate people out of Mariupol all through the war, but it is physically impossible in the areas where it's the active fighting zone, and that was my mom's district. It was also so the streets in which my apartment building stands. It was this divisive line between the Russian-controlled and Ukrainian-controlled parts. So basically, they kept fighting for that, and finally, it's now under the Ukrainian control, which means that their fighting ceased, or at least it's not as active anymore.
And so that allowed her to be able to get out, and the volunteers could access.
Yeah, the volunteers came in and they walked them on foot. So they left Mariupol on foot, and then eventually they were picked up by an evacuation bus with no windows, with bullet holes, etc. Along the way, they met because you have to pass a whole bunch of checkpoints, and it's the Russian-controlled area between Mariupol and towards Zaporizhia, so like Berdyansk is on the way. One of the stories that my mom told me, and that's gonna really stick with me a long time, is that so you have to show your ID to all the Russian soldiers on the way. And one of the guys, one of the Russian soldiers, told to the woman who was sitting in the bus next to my mom and who also had kids with her, he told her that she should take better care of her children because it looks like they're cold. And it is one of the most screwed up things I've ever heard in my life, the parental advice from people who destroyed everything those people had. It's yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be thousands of individual stories of that experience that your mum's lived through as well, because it's it's impossible for us to comprehend. And here we are sat, in the French Riviera in Cannes, which is sort of so at odds with what's happening in Ukraine. It's a little bit strange to think about it too much. But so your mum is coming back to London, is that right?
Well, she's never been before, so she's only coming to London for the first time. But yes, that's right. She got her visa. She got her UK family visa in one day, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm so lucky that I actually have. I had to produce the hell out of it to try and fast track the process. So I emailed, texted, tweeted, Facebooked, Instagrammed. I'm probably forgetting some other social media. I'm sorry. So I reached out to my MP, and she personally handled the case. So my mom's visa was sorted within the day. It's Sidik Tulip, and she's amazing. This is not a paid advertising. It's just the reality is that there are also some good stories to be told.
Well, it's a story with a happy ending, which is fantastic to hear, and we all need happy endings. I think stories with happy endings at the moment. Switching to TV, because this is where we are at MIP TV. There seems to have been a few TV industry organisations partnering up together in Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what they're looking to achieve?
So the whole industry is realizing that it must survive. It's the best way to support the people of the industry, their families, and ultimately Ukraine. So we start to, change starts with you. So we're trying to rebuild what's within our reach. And it's the first time in my history in the industry where everyone in Ukrainian content industry is coming together like that, because we were basically like a dysfunctional family at times, arguing about things, what's the right things to move forward, etc. But this is the time when, like the whole of country, our content industry is standing together. So we're here with the stand, which also has a name of Stand with Ukraine, and it's Film UA, but also 3 media groups, 1+1 Media, Starlight Media Group, and Channel Ukraine, who basically combined their resources, their people, efforts, etc., to jointly find a way forward for the industry. And we had a panel dedicated to that as part of the conference program, and we're taking a lot of meetings, trying to find ways of actionable solutions. That's the plan, and we do have an action plan, and the industry is listening, and the feedback is positive, and there is a both human and political will to help us. And I think there is a strong realization of that by helping us, we're actually helping all of us, not just the Ukrainian industry, and that's it's marvelous.
What's been the industry's reaction to people, on the stand? Because you must be meeting and seeing people from all around the world here. TV industries from many countries are here. What's been their reaction to the Ukrainian stand and your discussions?
It was very popular. Oh my God, so many people stopped by, and of course we had a lot of meetings pre-scheduled, and people are very willing to listen, and everyone is already doing something anyway, which is also fantastic. It's just that there's this also awareness that if we tell them what's the best way, it's like on a personal level, people reach out to me and ask what's the best way to help. It's the same thing. When there's this willingness to help, if we tell them how to best direct it, it's a win-win for everyone. So basically, the industry is saying that, yes, we want to do it. Tell us what you need us to do. And this is what we're doing. We're trying to tell them what to do. And to be fair, because living in a state of war means that there's so many things you have to deal with, and you're just also at a loss emotionally. We have a lot of ideas, but we haven't formalized many of them. So we're going home now and working on that. But we now know that when we do formalize it and go back to all the people we met here in Cannes, there will be ears to listen to what we have to say and work on the plan together.
And just finally then, just remind us how the global TV industry can help Ukrainian content businesses.
If I were to put it in one sentence, it's basically the best way to help our industries, actually to help us keep the industry. So we must continue producing content. It is at some point going to be about these stories that we have to, once we process the trauma and survive the war, these are the stories that have to be told and have to be heard. But to be able to do that, the industry must survive first. But before we get there, keeping our industry and continuing producing content is a way to help the people within this industry. Our industry is the people. It's their families who are dependent on them being able to work. It's the auxiliary industry, and then everyone can go and buy potatoes from the local farmers, etc. So it is a trickle-down economy. If we start producing content, we help so much more than just the content creators. But to be able to do that, we need money, and there is no money in the industry in Ukraine at the moment. So what we're trying to do is to set up a global acquisition fund, and we're asking everyone to join. If you're a channel, if you're a platform, but also if you're a distributor or an association, individual producer, production company, please contribute to the funds, and the money that will be pooled in that fund will go to fund content across the whole Ukrainian industry. So it's not for Film UA specifically or one of the groups we're partnering with. It is for the wider industry, and it is going to be a charity fund set up outside of Ukraine, independently managed by a board that we are putting together. So the idea is to have a cross-section of the industry represented in that board. So a commercial channel, a public broadcaster, a global streamer, a distribution company, a festival, a media company, etc. So in that sense, it will be like a proper charity funds, so that it is for, accountability, transparency, and all of that. And the money that you put in, and every little helps, will go to fund content creation across different genres. So we'll do factual and animation as the most easy things to do straight away, but also scripted drama. And then thinking ahead, the beauty of the idea is that once that content is produced, we would invite the companies. Well, it's of course it's of interest first and foremost for channels and the platforms, but we would invite them to actually broadcast that content that they helped fund anyway. So hopefully, ultimately, this will also create this bigger integration of Ukraine into the global economy and just make us all better connected as human beings on all levels.
It sounds like there's been a lot of work done on it, and we'll include a link to that initiative in the episode description. Kateryna, thank you again. It was so lovely to hear your mum's story, and it's so lovely to see you in person after our original conversation when you were in Kyiv. And I remember you saying, I'm not sure what time we'll be able to do this interview because we may have to abandon it in case of the air raid, one which really sort of struck home to me. But it's lovely to see you safe and sound, and I'm sure you're looking forward to seeing your mum in London very soon.
Indeed, and thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to coming back to report on the success of our acquisition funds.
All right, good luck.
Thank you.
So we found a quiet, sunny spot on the top of the Palais de Festival, which is very pleasant, away from the hustle and bustle of the market floor. And I'm delighted to be joined by Gregoire Polad, who's the Director General
of ACT, who's just won the MIP Sustainable Development Goals Award in association with the United Nations at MIP TV 2022. Gregoire, welcome to Telecast.
Hey, thank you for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure.
Tell us about ACT and your organisation's goals.
Sure. So ACT, which stands for it's quite a mouthful, Association of Commercial Television and Video on Demand Services in Europe, is, as the name indicates, the association that represents television and VOD in Europe. We've been around since 1989. The original founders were ITV, ProSieben, Mediaset, which was called Fininvest at the time, and TF1, and has since then grown to 28 members. So basically our members are the largest players in the market. They're active in all European member states, the UK, of course, EEA, and worldwide. So what does ACT do? Well, ACT, for lack of a better description, is a lean, mean lobbying machine. We are there to make sure that the interests of commercial broadcasters are basically heard. Because as you may know, legislation, a large part of legislation in Europe is drawn up in Brussels. And legislation pertaining to IP, copyright, pertaining to data, pertaining to audiovisual media law, and pertaining to data is centered in Brussels. So we at ACT have two main goals, which is A, to understand what's going on in Brussels for our members, and B, to try and change course or alter course or propose courses for the legislator to move forward so that we can ensure that our members can reinvest in content to the benefit of millions of Europeans.
So the award that you just won was RX Global's new award, which is in association with the United Nations, and it's basically been for your work on disinformation. You're part of the Development Goals Media Compact, which is essentially the media aspect of the United Nations key sustainability goals, and of which there are, I think, 13 or
17.
There's 17. Okay, so that's everything from equality, climate change, anything that comes under the umbrella of sustainability. Your award, which you've just brought out very proudly in front of me, is essentially for your work on Sustainable Development Goals for Disinformation. Your members are commercial broadcasters.
They are.
How can commercial broadcasters then address the key challenges that society faces and our planet faces as well?
Yeah. First of all, they've been doing it for a while, right? Because if you look at TV, I mean, the basic goal of TV is informing and raising awareness. But it also creates realities in a way, right? It's thought-provoking. It creates conversation. It leads people to look at the world around them and question whether, we're going on the right way or not. So for us, it was a no-brainer, first of all, to join the SDG Media Compact. But also for commercial media generally, despite the fact that we are commercial, of course, and we have commercial interests, we also have an interest in our viewers and making sure that, they are informed and they have the right facts to make the right decisions. Really, for us, a good opportunity to contribute to this global effort to look at the problems that the planet faces and to be able to communicate on them in a way that allows people to make their mind up with plural views, because that's what it's about, whether it's commercial or public, it's the yin and the yang. We have media pluralism, cultural diversity, and we are, as commercial broadcasters and VOD providers, a substantial part of that equation.
So we're seeing at the moment, the efforts that Russia and other states around the world are making when it comes to disinformation. And we're seeing some terrible images that are coming out of Ukraine. Of course, that's just the latest in a long line of such disinformation, not just from that country, but from others as well. Now, we're also seeing that state broadcasters, they've got really great resources at their disposal dedicated to fact-checking. Commercial broadcasters, can they have the same sort of resources in place, and how can they maintain and build their own disinformation resources?
First of all, if you look at the picture of the number of channels, right? If we're looking just pure broadcasting in Europe, about 85% of channels in Europe, or 90% of channels, are commercial, right? So even though, for one large public broadcaster, there will be significant resources, you'll have behind that 10, 20, 30, 40 general information broadcasters, commercial broadcasters that are there to provide news. So I think, the resources kind of become equivalent after a while. And it's not a competition, right? We're all there to be able to bring resources, to bring diverse stories to the viewers, etc., and diverse angles with regard to it. And it's not an alternative fact issue. It's just a simple different perspectives on what the news is, with one fundamental principle, which is that, of course, you check your facts and you have editorial independence. I think that's the key thing that kind of unites all news providers around the world. And that's the real distinction, if you want, between news coming out of regulated players such as ourselves or PSBs, and information coming out of completely random sources. So for us, clearly, we're putting the means into it because it's what our viewers expect. I mean, if you have a general interest channel, your viewers will want to see news, and will want to have news, even though it's not, frankly, a profit-driving activity, but they'll be looking for that. So for us, fundamentally, the key issue is how do we get the revenues to reinvest in that news, and that's where all the other work on copyright, piracy, etc., making sure that we can continue to basically generate revenues to pay for other areas which are just not as revenue generating. But we know that, and we're fine with that, because at the end of the day, we also accept that we do have kind of a sort of public service mission in that way, that we are there to inform people properly, especially when we see all the rubbish that's online. And it's not uncommon these days that, at least 2 to 3 times a week in the news program, you'll have a full segment about, fact-checking for stories that came out online. And that's a rather good thing. But I think broadcasters, whether commercial or not, would rather not spend that revenue having to do that. So our main goal is to try to make sure that, whether it's the Facebooks or Googles of this world, have to essentially abide by equivalent rules than broadcasters, so that we don't have to spend that kind of investment and money on that, and we can do other stories.
You talked about regulation, and regulation is key here, isn't it? Because essentially regulation engenders trust.
Yep.
When it comes to broadcasters, and broadcasters have to adhere by a pretty strict set of rules and regulations that some of the huge social media Death Stars, that, to use a quote from Evan Shapiro, a regular guest on Telecast, that they don't have to necessarily sit under. And we've seen the way that disinformation can spread online, and that, like wildfire, and the way that certain governments and movements as well, we're talking about, during COVID, we're talking about referendums, whether it be Brexit, whether it be American elections, whether it be UK elections, whether it be elections in whatever country, we can see the way that certain governments and movements are spreading disinformation in order to muddy those waters and break down trust, essentially, in these a lot of these established broadcasts. So how does your work, tackle disinformation then?
We're not the be-all and end-all, right? So our members do the news. They have the journalists. They do the fact-checking, right? Which is not what the ACT does. Our goal, if you want, is to look at where we see gaps or lack of level playing field with regard to rules. And many governments have always tried to disinform. That's not new. Many private outfits have always tried to disinform at some stage. That's not news. What is new is the fact that we now have very powerful companies, trillion-dollar companies, Death Stars, as you call them, that basically benefit from this, and who have been profiting for years now from basically a hall pass in terms of regulation. Because whether we like it or not, they are, in a way, competing for the same eyeballs. They are taking attention from people. It is the attention-seeking economy that we're looking at. They basically win from an asymmetric system whereby, media such as ourselves, we have investment obligations, we have a huge rule book in terms of what we need to do, and these guys have practically nothing. And the issue there is that, at the end of the day, we won't be able, I think, in the long term to be able to carry out all of these obligations if the level playing field isn't there. And that's what we've been calling for many years. Because right now, if you look at the rules, basically, the commercial broadcasters, PSBs, we look at, a huge, pages and pages and pages of rules, whereas, social networks, video sharing platforms, many of them don't. And that's an issue. And it's also an issue from the point of view of the viewer, because the viewer doesn't know when he's in a regulated environment or an unregulated environment, because he can't tell the difference. The world of screens we're in now means that he hops from one to the other, and that can be very confusing. And so our fight, if you want, in this is to make sure that at the end of the day, the viewer is protected no matter how he chooses to access some form of content. And we want to be able to, make sure that is enshrined in some forms of regulation, if not one, several, because it's once you break the trust, right, which is, I think we're almost there, actually. Once you've completely broken the trust in institutions, in news models, etc., then you start having people who live in completely separate universes. And it's quite dangerous there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my son. He's like 16 years old. He doesn't really watch linear TV anymore. So the information that he's consuming, we talk about this quite a lot, is pretty much completely unregulated. And that youth audience, that Gen Z audience that's coming through now, in 10 years' time, that does present a problem, doesn't it? Where Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, wherever they're getting their entertainment, they're getting unregulated information, essentially, and they don't watch TV. So, what their worldview is going to be in 10 years' time is pretty disturbing, really, if you think about it. Not to be too depressing on a beautiful sunny day like this, but it's it is slightly worrying, isn't it?
Yes, they don't watch. Probably, I mean, I can't talk for your son, but I'd say generally, many people tell me that people don't watch TV. I say, well, actually, you do. You just don't know that you do, because obviously, TV has mutated, developed. The content is spread across different mediums.
He's not watching live news.
He's not watching linear. Yes, or he's not watching live news. But and that is problematic indeed, because it doesn't adhere to certain of the standards that we're used to, and it does create, of course, like we talk about the echo chambers. We talk about people basically being stuck in their own realities, parallel realities. Yes, it's very disturbing. And of course, it leads to stuff like, 6th of January, the Capitol, and all the rest that we've seen. And I guess that's why there's such an onus and push globally to deal with the issue. Because, I don't know what it's going to take. Between the issues we had with Brexit, between the issues we had with the Capitol, and the issues we had with COVID, where literally people were setting masks on fire because they thought it was spreading through 5G masks. It's very worrying, and there's a point where you can, of course, talk media literacy, and you can have fact checkers doing their job, etc., but that's never going to be enough until you have the regulator stepping in and saying, look, sorry, social media, sorry, you're actually going to have to invest. And that's not going to happen through AI, just AI, right? It means actually getting moderators. And maybe not moderators that are in the Philippines getting paid, 3 pence an hour and basically committing suicide because they have to watch such atrocious things. But it is going to take a huge investment. And I think that's what, ourselves and regulators are calling for. which is, at the end of the day, if you're a media company, which in a way these companies are, there's three things that, are certain in life: death, taxes, and regulation.
And what's interesting, going back to Evan Shapiro's Death Star analogy, I mean, when you see those diagrams that his map of the media universe that he constantly updates as is a media cartographer.
They're great, by the way.
Yeah, they are fantastic. But it really brings it home, the size. And the reason why we're using the term Death Star is that when you see them laid out physically, you say the size of, I don't know, a baseball. Google may be the size of a baseball, whereas, ITV might be the size of a pinhead almost in comparison. So you realise then the resources that they've got at their disposal, and you're absolutely right. There should be some form of regulation. I mean, can you see it happening anytime soon?
Well, I think on the size point, it goes back to scale and market growth. Because if you look at the story in Europe, we've regularly, and this is like a never-ending saga of, we need to grow, we need to gain scale, so we can invest, so we can create bigger media companies, so we can actually go in there and reinvest in news and make sure that we don't end up getting gobbled up basically by these companies. So there is a competition aspect to that, right? There's an issue around, well, okay, so how are we gonna allow European companies to grow so they can continue to matter? Honestly, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball or a Death Star at home, but I would say that when it comes to subjects that are so fundamental about, which touch the heart of our democracies, which touch the heart of our health, and I mean, a lot of people, we were talking about disinformation, are treating disinformation like they treat the big tobacco problem, right? At the end of the day, it's the same issue. It's a huge public health issue. And having that means coming up with severe regulatory remedies towards these platforms. And until that happens, I don't think we're going to be able to seriously deal with it, because we've gone past the point of the market is going to correct itself. Clearly not. So now, and it's clear that now there's a willingness. We've seen in Europe there's a Digital Services Act, there's a Digital Markets Act, completely different things, but that are being voted or have been voted or agreed upon. The same is happening in the US, not far away. So there's a willingness, there's a political understanding that it's happening. Will it be enough? Not sure, but it's a step in the right direction.
Well, Gregoire, it's been fascinating listening to you, and congratulations on the award again. And good luck with all the good work that you're doing, and maybe we'll see you again at a MIPCOM or another industry market very soon.
Thank you so much, Justin. It was a pleasure being on. Thank you.
Well, that's about it for this week's show. There's only a few days left to grab tickets for the Telecast Content Funding Festival in London, taking place on April 26th. Just head to telecast.com/events to buy tickets. They're starting at just $199 for producers and $299 for financiers. And for a limited time, Telecast listeners can get an extra £20 off the ticket price by entering Telecast Plus. That's Telecast in capital letters and the plus symbol at checkout. We hope to see you there. Telecast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in Cannes. Until next week, as always, stay safe